Mongolia, a name that once made the whole world tremble. They conquered Asia and Europe, burned cities to the ground, crushed ancient empires. No army could stand against their horsemen. But then, everything changed, in just one fateful day. A small river in the east. A general who used the tide itself as a weapon. An army thought to be invincible was drowned within hours. How could a tiny nation bring the most powerful war machine in history to its knees? How did hundreds of Mongol warships suddenly become nothing more than drifting wrecks? The answer lies in the battle that shocked the world, the Battle of Bạch Đằng. Hit subscribe to uncover the forgotten secrets of ancient history. The 13th century. The world stood before a terrifying storm called Mongolia. In just a few decades, they turned vast lands into their own map. From the deserts of Central Asia, through Persia, all the way to Europe. No fortress was strong enough. No army was powerful enough. They were called the Invincible War Machine. An empire stretching from east to west, never knowing defeat. The question is, what could stop their horsemen and their sails? Who could make such a mighty empire come to a halt? Dai Viet, a tiny nation in the east. A land that seemed just a small dot on the map, facing a colossal power. They had no armies of hundreds of thousands. They had no iron and steel technology like Europe. But they possessed a weapon even more terrifying than swords and spears. It was intelligence, strategy, and the will to survive. Twice before, the Mongols had poured down. The capital, Tanglong, was burned. The king and his court had to retreat. The whole country seemed to have no way to survive. Yet, amid smoke and despair, one general rose. He understood that facing the Mongols head-on was suicide. He understood that only wisdom could save an entire nation. He began calculating every move, every river bend, every tide. Instead of running, he turned nature itself into an ally. It is said that Mongolia could crush any army. But could they defeat a river itself? Could those hundreds of mighty warships escape the trap set beneath the waters? Do you believe that a small river could become a weapon capable of destroying an invincible army? Because history is about to prove, even the greatest empire can sink to the bottom of the waters. The year 1258. For the first time, the Mongol horsemen poured into Dai Viet. It was a terrifying moment as a massive army, having just crushed China, appeared on the northern border. People saw Mongol banners fluttering, and fear spread through every village and every field. The capital, Tanglong, fell in just a few short days. The people of Dai Viet had to retreat, avoiding the storm of attack. But the Mongols did not get to enjoy their victory. Fierce resistance, disease, and the hot, humid climate forced them to withdraw. The seemingly invincible empire had faltered for the first time. Yet the story did not end there. In 1285, once again, the iron hooves descended. This time, they carried the ambition to completely crush Dai Viet. They burned, they slaughtered, and once more, Tanglong was engulfed in flames. The king and his court were forced to retreat to the northern mountains. The people lived in chaos and flight. Many believed Dai Viet had reached the depths of despair. Could a small nation rise a second time against such a colossal enemy? But in the darkest moment, the will to resist blazed stronger than ever. General Trần Hưng Đạo rallied the soldiers, employing guerrilla tactics to strike directly at the cumbersome enemy forces. Sudden ambushes and swift battles caused the Mongol army to bleed endlessly. After months of exhaustion, the army thought unbeatable had to retreat in humiliation. 2 invasions. 2 times the Mongols brought absolute confidence. And 2 times, they left in bitter defeat. But this also revealed a terrifying truth. An empire like Mongolia would never accept defeat. They would return. And when they did, they would bring all their hatred and power to crush Dai Viet once and for all. Could Dai Viet survive a third trial? Could a small nation withstand the final fury of the greatest empire the world had ever known? Hit subscribe to follow this bloody journey, where history reveals secrets you've never heard before. His name was Trần Hưng Đạo. Later generations called him the Holy General. But in the 13th century, he was just a man of flesh and blood, standing at the center of an entire nation's survival. He was born into a royal lineage but grew up amid turmoil and chaos. From a young age, he witnessed the terrifying power of the Northern Horsemen. But instead of fear, he nurtured a vow in his heart: if the country were invaded, he would never submit. Trần Hưng Đạo was more than a warrior with a sword. He was a genius strategist. He understood that Đại Việt could not win through numbers, could not win through brute force. The only way was to use intelligence to defeat an enemy thought to be invincible. He studied Eastern military tactics and learned to harness the advantages of timing, terrain, and unity. He once said, "Use the weak to defeat the strong, the few to fight the many. If applied wisely, victory is still possible." These were not just words. They became a guiding principle for an entire nation during its struggle for survival. When the Mongols poured in a second time, he took the lead. He commanded the army, organizing daring battles, turning forests and rivers into battlefields. He made the enemy constantly uneasy, always ambushed, always bleeding bit by bit. He was the one who shifted the tide, turning despair into hope. And when news of a third invasion reached the court, the entire kingdom trembled. But Trần Hưng Đạo remained calm. He knew the decisive battle had arrived. This would not only be a fight to defend the nation. It was an opportunity to teach the world a lesson: even the greatest empires could fall. Could he withstand the fiercest wrath from the north? Would his strategy be enough to sink an entire fleet in the raging waters? And how could a single man bear the fate of an entire people on his shoulders? The answer lies in the secret of the extraordinary plan soon to be unleashed on the Bạch Đằng River. A peaceful river suddenly turned into a battlefield. This was the bold idea of Trần Hưng Đạo. He did not choose a fortress, nor the open plains, but a place that seemed harmless: the Bạch Đằng River. There, the tides rose and fell every day. When the water surged, the river's bed opened wide, and the sharp wooden stakes hidden beneath the surface completely disappeared. But when the tide receded, a forest of spikes emerged, turning the river into a massive killing ground. Trần Hưng Đạo ordered his soldiers to cut large tree trunks, sharpen their tips, reinforce them with iron, and secretly plant them in the riverbed. Thousands of stakes lay hidden beneath the murky waters. It was not just a trap, it was an invisible assassin, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The plan was simple, yet extremely risky. The Đại Việt forces would feign defeat, luring the Mongol fleet deep into the river at high tide. Then, as the water receded, the massive army would be stranded, their ships shattered on the iron stakes. At that moment, archers, fire ships, and Đại Việt soldiers would strike all at once. A game of life and death. If the timing was wrong, Đại Việt would lose everything. If the Mongols discovered the trap, the plan would collapse from the start. Could an entire nation place its fate in the delicate rhythm of the tides? But Trần Hưng Đạo trusted nature. He trusted the discipline of his people. And above all, he trusted that intelligence could sink any force. Imagine the giant warships that once dominated the northern seas, now charging into a trap set by nature itself. This was no ordinary confrontation. It was a gamble between a man and the greatest empire in history. Would the Mongols be cunning enough to recognize the death waiting beneath the waves? Or would they blindly charge into the jaws of the trap, where an entire empire would have to kneel before a river? Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next part, where this terrifying trap begins to close in. March 1288. The sky over Bạch Đằng was gray and heavy, with fierce sea winds blowing into the river mouth. On the water, the mighty Mongol Yuan fleet advanced like a storm of iron and steel. Hundreds of massive warships, their white sails gleaming, followed one another, filling the river's flow. The sound of war drums and shouting echoed across the sky. The Mongols believed that a single strike, a single wave of fire, would crush Dai Viet completely. But strangely, the Dai Viet forces did not confront them directly. Instead of fighting to the death, they constantly retreated, striking then withdrawing, making the enemy ever more arrogant. Trần Hưng Đạo deliberately lured them deep into the river, where the enormous trap lay in wait. The local people also contributed. Small boats, bamboo rafts, all joined in a storm of arrows, harassing the enemy and driving them into a frenzied chase. The deeper they advanced, the more careless the Mongol Yuan fleet became. Little did they know that beneath the waves, thousands of sharp stakes waited to tear the hulls apart. Then the fateful moment arrived. The tide began to recede. The once peaceful river transformed, currents running backward, stripping away the fleet's false sense of security. A terrible crack rang out. The lead warship rammed into an iron stake. The bow splintered, water poured in like a waterfall. Screams echoed across the river as Mongol Yuan sailors panicked, unable to comprehend what was happening. Then the second ship, the third, the entire fleet began to collide, run aground, and list. Masts collapsed, large ships became deadly traps. On shore, Trần Hưng Đạo gave the command. Archers fired in unison, their flaming arrows lighting up the evening sky. The scene was enough to make anyone ask, how could an army once thought invincible be so helpless against a river? Was this the beginning of their destruction, or merely a challenge to push them to rise again? The answer will come in the next part, when the trap fully closes and the Bạch Đằng River transforms into the graveyard of an entire empire. The Bạch Đằng River began to reveal its sharp stakes, hidden beneath the clear waters for days. The first Mongol ship rammed into a stake. A terrifying crack echoed through the air, with splintered iron tore through the hull. Soldiers jumped into the water, but the receding tide left them floundering, trapped in the narrow river. The second ship, the third, and then hundreds of warships followed, crashing into the trap. Smoke and fire rose from burning vessels. Screams echoed along the riverbanks, carrying to the surrounding forests and mountains. The Mongol Yuan fleet, once deemed invincible, was now completely out of control. On shore, Trần Hưng Đạo smiled quietly. Elite archers fired continuously, creating a blazing rain of arrows amid smoke and flames. Small rafts darted in, striking and harassing the enemy, driving them further into chaos. Every stake, every wave, every strike had been calculated perfectly. A question arises in the mind of anyone watching: how could a small river sink one of the most powerful armies in the world? Could the intelligence of a single man truly change the fate of an entire empire? The catastrophe continued to spread. Ships shattered, soldiers fell, flames devoured the river's surface. Those who thought victory would come easily now desperately sought escape. Order was gone, faith was gone, leaving only chaos and death lurking at every turn. This was more than a battle. It was a scene of destruction rarely recorded in history. An empire once thought unbeatable had fallen before the wisdom and courage of a small nation. Can you imagine the awe of those witnessing this for the first time? Could the arrogance of the invaders possibly survive this combination of nature and strategy? Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next part, where the devastating aftermath and the great legacy of the Battle of Bạch Đằng are revealed. When the smoke and fire cleared, the Bạch Đằng River returned to its calm state. But beneath the surface, hundreds of Mongol Yuan warships lay sunken, along with the bodies and the horror of the invading army. The most powerful empire in the world at that time, confident that no force could stop them, was forced to retreat in humiliation. Dai Viet had survived. People cheered across the villages. But the joy did not end there. The Battle of Bạch Đằng was not only a military victory. It was proof of intelligence, resilience, and perfectly timed strategy. Trần Hưng Đạo became a living legend. The lessons he left were passed down from generation to generation. Eastern and Western military scholars would later study his tactics. They called him the master of river warfare, a man who turned nature into an ally and made the seemingly impossible a reality. Yet the question still echoes, could any other army, no matter how strong, face such a brilliant challenger? Could intelligence become a weapon sharper than swords, spears, and warships? The consequences of the Battle of Bạch went far beyond the battlefield. The Mongols never dared to return to Dai Viet. This small nation maintained its independence and pride on the map of world history. And the message sent across nations was clear: it is not absolute power, but strategy and spirit that determine destiny. Looking back today, the Bạch Đằng River flows silently. But beneath its waters lives the story of a people who dared to confront the world's mightiest. Can you imagine if similar battles in other civilizations could astonish the world in the same way? Hit subscribe to explore more legendary battles, forgotten empires, and untold stories from history. The Battle of Bạch Đằng was not only a victory for Dai Viet. It was a lesson in intelligence, strategy, and courage rising above all material power. A small nation taught the greatest invader of its time a lesson that could never be forgotten. Trần Hưng Đạo did not rely solely on military tactics. He used nature, the tides, the river, and even the psychology of the enemy to achieve a comprehensive victory. This proves that it is not sheer strength, but strategy and determination that ultimately decide the outcome. Battles like Bạch Đằng raise the question, how many times in history have empires thought to be invincible fallen because of a single clever strategy? Can human ingenuity and courage truly change the fate of a vast empire? The legacy of Bạch Đằng lives on for centuries. It became a source of inspiration for generations of commanders and strategists. Every river, every terrain, every moment of nature can become an ally if used wisely. More importantly, the resilient spirit of the Dai Viet people continues to be remembered as a symbol of intelligence triumphing over every challenge. The big question for viewers today is, in modern battles between today's giants, what can we learn from Trần Hưng Đạo tactics? Can intelligence, creativity, and courage create miracles in every struggle, not just in war, but in the challenges of modern life? Hit subscribe to continue exploring forgotten battles, vanished empires, and surprising historical stories, where every detail has the power to change the course of events. The Bạch Đằng River now flows peacefully, leaving only the echoes of history behind. But the story of the day a mighty empire was sunk beneath its waters lives on forever in human memory. The Battle of Bạch Đằng was more than a military victory. It is proof that intelligence, strategy, and courage can overcome even seemingly invincible power. Imagine hundreds of massive warships, enemies who once shook entire continents, suddenly falling victim to a river and a brilliant plan. This is the power of humanity, when we harness nature, understand the enemy, and turn weakness into strength. The question remains, today, in personal challenges or modern conflicts between nations, can we learn lessons from these timeless strategies? The Battle of Bạch Đằng also left a great legacy. It continues to inspire generations with the power of strategy and intelligence. It reminds us that no empire is untouchable if the opponent is clever and resilient. And the resilient spirit of Dai Viet has become a symbol for anyone facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. If you want to dive deep into legendary battles rarely mentioned in history, if you want to explore the strategies, intelligence, and courage that changed the fate of an entire empire, if you want to see how a small river sank the most powerful army in the world, subscribe to the channel now. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any of these ancient historical stories full of surprises, drama, and thrilling excitement. Join us in a world where every battle holds valuable lessons and moments that make you marvel at human ingenuity. History is not just the past. It is inspiration, strategy, and the miracle of intelligence and courage. Subscribe so you never miss a single moment of these stories that astonish the world.